technology. I apologise in advance if we experience any unforeseen difficulties, which we will try to resolve as efficiently and as quickly as possible. Can I invite members to join me in saying the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom
Kingdom come.
thy will be done
Thy will be done.
on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread.
We forgive
Forgive
those
us
who
our trespasses,
and lead us
we
not
forgive those who
but
trespass,
deliver us from evil.
and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
For thine is the kingdom,
the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Amen.
Which is the point I usually say, please be seated. I don't think I need to do that this evening. I will now call upon apologies for absence, please. Have we received any, Mr. Griffiths, Mr. O'Keefe?
None have been received, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Declarations of interest. Any prior declarations of interest made under the Members' Code of Conduct have been published online. Interests previously disclosed at meetings are recorded in the minutes in the White Book, which is also published online. All these interests will be taken as read, as they are deemed to be repeated at this council meeting. Agenda item 5D contains, Mr. Page? Oh, sorry. Councillor Zarda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to flag up declarations of interest in my role as Deputy Chief Operating Officer at the Dudley Group in any matters related to health and social care. That to be noted.
That's duly noted, Councillor Zarda. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 5D contains the pay policy statement and references to terms and conditions of employment. The Chief Executive, Deputy Chief Executive, Directors and relevant officers have all declared a peculiar interest in this relevant item due to their employment within this authority, this council. Appropriate officers will, however, remain throughout the meeting to assist with the conduct of the business. Technical problem. Sorry, Jim. Sorry, I'm just having some adjustments made to the microphone and it's still above my head. Excuse me. Is that better? Thank you. I take you can all hear me very well. Yep.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. I hope you haven't missed too much with this microphone not being in the right position. Councillors are discussed, so I missed that bit. I moved to the minutes of the meetings held on the 30th of November and on the 21st of December 2020 be confirmed as a correct record and signed. Does council agree?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes, Mayor.
Aye.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mayor's announcements. At the last meeting, we held a minute silence for former Councillor John Davies. It is with great sadness that I have to report on the recent deaths of former councillors Margaret Wilson and Clem Boff, and also for Jeff Amerson. Jeff Amerson was the consort to the Deputy Mayor in the 2011-2012 municipal year. John Davies served on Dudley MBC from 1978 to 1991 and from 2008 to 2012. His service with previous authorities date back to 1958. John was the mayor of the borough in 1987-1988. Margaret Wilson served the Briliel ward on this council from 1992 to 2016. She was also the mayor of Dudley in 2002-2003. Clem Boff served as a councillor in the Coastal East ward from 2013 to 2016. Will the council please observe a period of silence as a token of respect in the memory of our former colleagues? Thank you. Thank you. Can I call upon members who may wish to pay tribute to any of our former colleagues? If you indicate, I will then get the Chief Executive to tell me which order they've been placed. I'll first call on Councillor Patrick Harley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, speaking first on John Davies, you know, you alluded to first serving the authority in some form or other in 1958. It's hard to comprehend that. That's longer than most members on this council have been on this earth. So what an achievement. Of course, he stood several times when he joined the Conservative Party for Brockmore and Pensnet. And of course, many times was unsuccessful. And then one year in 2008, he was our candidate for Netherton and Woodside. And I remember our former group leader and former councillor Corns, panicking on the evening of that count when we realised that we'd won Brockmore and Pensnet with a different candidate, current councillor Sue Greenaway. And of course, imagine his joy at the end of the night when all the votes had been totted up, and actually, you know, we not only won Brockmore and Pensnet, but also Netherton with John as the candidate. He was fun to be with on the campaign trail, had an extremely dry sense of humour, and obviously very sadly missed by many people within the council environment. Reference Margaret Wilson, Mr. Mayor. My first recollection of Margaret Wilson was this lady chairing the old Briliel Hill Area Committee, and me as a young, with a lot to say, as most of us are when we're very young and inexperienced, a lot to say at one of my, well, I think my first area committee. And I kept interrupting Labour members of the committee, and then this lady just popped her head round, because we were in an oval horseshoe type setup, and she leaned forward, and I saw this lady with big hair and glasses peer at me with much authority and say, "Councillor Harley, if you keep interrupting my meeting, I shall take you over my knee." Mr. Mayor, what could I say after that? I duly got in line, behaved, and never misbehaved at one of her committees again. And from that day forward, I had immense respect for her, and also enjoyed a lot of meetings with her. She was also another former member, Mr. Mayor, with a cracking sense of humour. and all members, including former councillor Boff, they will all be sadly missed. And of course, as a group, we send our condolences to former councillor Doreen Amerson on the sad passing of her husband Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Councillor Zarda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Listening to Councillor Harley obviously contribute to everything that he said around the immense respect for councillors that have served their time on Dudley Council, and certainly shocking to hear obviously that John Davies was setting the foundations for us as future representatives well before we were even being educated, let alone representing. Very sad, Mr. Mayor, that we sit here in our separate homes mourning the passing of our former colleagues, much respected. And I'll say a brief word or two, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Mayor, about those colleagues that I do remember. Certainly start with John Davies. It's fair to say he wasn't expecting to represent Netherton, and I had certainly had him as a paper candidate before who stood against me, and he was as shocked as we were when he won the seat. And I think it's fair to say that he probably had to readjust some of his holiday plans for that calendar year, because he didn't expect to be in council meetings, I can bet. But what I always found about John is in all of his personal interactions with us as council and ward colleagues, that I always found that he was fair, and I always found that he was polite in those interactions. And, I very much enjoyed working with him, albeit was very keen to see him move away from Netherton for obvious political reasons, but that was nothing personal. Margaret, a much respected and valued member of the group and the council, as Councillor Harley has said. He obviously, Councillor Harley, hasn't taken on board all of the feedback that Margaret gave him, but that's work in progress, and we'll carry on working with him to make amends. Held a number of key positions across the council, well liked across the breadth of the chamber, and remained in touch with the group long after she left. She'll be remembered with fondness and friendship by those that served with her. I knew her for a brief period of time, and I always respected her contribution, and she always made an effort to come to our Netherton Park Fun Day, which I enjoyed seeing her at. She reached the station of first citizen, Mr. Mayor, and during her time in public office was an incredible champion for the people of this borough. Clem, we had Clem for one term, and in that short term he had a fantastic sense of humour, and one of the things I always admired about Clem was that he was straight talking and honest. And the time he spent meeting the people of Cosley on a range of very, very sensitive issues and listening to their views and bringing that back to the group is something I think that all councillors can learn lessons from. The qualities that make the difference between being a councillor and being a community representative is something that Clem had spades of. Their sad deaths, Mr. Mayor, and contributions will be mourned by thousands of residents across the borough. Some may not know that they have passed, and I hope that this is an opportunity where we can share with those residents the immense contribution that they have made. My warm sympathies to the families, and our sympathies obviously from the group having lost members, but also recognising that those members who weren't on our group were still part of our group because we sat around the same chamber. I knew Dorian, but obviously sad that her husband has passed, and I send my sympathies there. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Zarda. Councillor Adam Aston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an honour to be able to say a few words in tribute to our friend and comrade in every sense of the word, Margaret Wilson. I knew Margaret since I was a child. given that she and my mum began serving together on this council in the 1990s. Margaret was the very definition of a community councillor. She was not only respected, but she was loved by many of the people she represented, a status I fear not many of us will attain. She served the people of Brierley Hill with compassion, with dignity, and with an incredibly good sense of humour. And I'd like to share with you just one example of that sense of humour in action. Back in the mid-90s, Margaret was chair of the council's Community Development Unit, which at that time played an active role in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. Every year as chair, Margaret would be invited to accompany Dudley young people who had achieved their Gold D.A.V. Awards to either St James's Palace or Buckingham Palace to meet the Duke of Edinburgh as the awards were presented, and every year she would go. Now, someone asked Margaret at a public meeting what Prince Philip said to her when she met him. And without a moment's hesitation, she replied, "Bloody hell, Margaret, you're not wearing that same frock again. I've seen it 3 times already." She was the best of us, Mr. Mayor, and I'm wearing a rose for her tonight. My condolences also to the families of Clem Boff, John Davies and Mr. Amerson. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haston. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I knew Clem obviously as a fellow Labour councillor. John Davies less so, but he was actually a constituent until fairly recently in Brockmore and Pensnet. But it's Margaret who I want to pay particular tribute to this evening, because it's Margaret that I knew well during my time as a councillor, but also before I became a councillor. And I can recall that in 1998, when I was first elected, Margaret was one of the councillors who was very experienced and very supportive of the many new councillors, many new female councillors that were elected that year in 1998. And I will never forget the help and support and advice that she gave me when I was new in my role. I would also repeat and emphasise and support what Councillor Aston has said about Margaret. She paved the way really with her role as Chair of Community Development. She was herself a genuine community councillor, very personable, very well liked in her own ward, but beyond, because of her community development role. And I can recall that as Brockmore and Pensnet councillor, ourselves and Brierley Hill councillors used to do joint surgeries at the library, and I can remember almost every week you'd have several people come into the library, several of her constituents saying, you know, where's Margaret, how's Margaret? And you really did get a sense of the enormous love that there was for Margaret particularly within her own ward. And of course, Margaret lived in Brierley Hill and was well known before she became a councillor, and became even more well known when she became a councillor, and served her constituents really well. I'd also say as well, in other roles that she held, she acquitted those roles with absolute dignity and humour, as others have said. And I too can remember, like Councillor Harley, I can remember the area committees. They could be quite lively meetings, and I do recall how well she conducted those meetings, and everything done with good humour and good grace. And again, grateful to her for that. Finally, Mr. Mayor, one of the great sadnesses, of course, for losing Margaret is she was a loss to Brierley Hill when she stood down as a councillor. She's been a loss to the council. She's been a loss to the community, but of course, above all, Margaret was a very family orientated person. Before her ill health, she was a very, she had to care for members of her family who were not well, and she was a very caring person, and was all their interests were always at the forefront of her mind too. So I give my commiserations for her family, who must be really missing her at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Foster. Councillor Craigie, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was deeply saddened to hear of the passing of former councillor Margaret Wilson. And as many have said before, she was a well-known stalwart community councillor. And whilst I didn't work with her in Brierley Hill, she's still warmly spoken about and remembered by the community groups and residents alike. So just want you to know she will be missed by all there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craigie. Councillor Gentle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to pay tribute to my ward colleague, Mr. Clem Boff, who, as we all know, has sadly passed away. As you will all know, Clem served on the council for a number of years and he served for the residents of Coseley. I only met Clem when I started my councillor role within Coseley, so I've only known him for a few years. But over that time, I spent quite a bit of time with him campaigning in the ward. And as well as being funny, he was passionate about life's injustices, and he always was able to articulate these in a way that captured people's attention. I believe he had a big family and he was very well known within the Coseley area, and he would be missed by many. And I'd like to send my condolences to his family and friends. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gentle. Councillor Ridney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak about my colleague, Councillor Boff. As Councillor Gentle has just said, a passionate man, a passionate voice for Coseley, passionate about the Labour Party, passionate about the trade union movement. He was passionate about his family. He loved his holidays. A man with a great sense of humour. He will be sadly missed here in Coseley because before he became a councillor, when he stepped in to finish the term of our colleague Councillor Davies, he would always be at every public meeting. If there was a public meeting held, Clem would be there and he would be the voice there for the people. I know that the leader of the council has been to many where Clem has had his say about what he thought was going on. But he was a lovely man, a good friend. He will be missed in Coseley by the people, and he will be missed by the ward party. Our ward party meetings will not be the same without Clem. He was a man with a great sense of humour, and as many of you know, before he became a councillor, he was on the Pensioner Federation and always spoke very warmly of them, although he did refer to them as the twirlies. For those that don't know what the twirlies are people with bus passes, and when they get on the bus and the bus conductor says, "You're too early because you're there before 9:30," and he took great pleasure in telling that many, many times. He will be missed, a great campaigner, and made a real mark on Coseley people. My condolences also to Margaret Wilson's family. She was a great support when I first came on the council, and also to Jeff. Condolences to Doreen on the loss of her husband Jeff, who I met many times during her term as the mayor. So and to John Davies, I didn't know him personally, but condolences to the family. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ridney. I call upon Councillor Greenaway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I put my hand up really to speak about John Davies because I knew him reasonably well whilst I was a councillor. Unbeknownst to me, he used to be an old family friend of my in-laws, but I didn't know him then. When I became a councillor for the first time, he took me under his wing and looked after me really well. If we were on many committees together, and he was always there to support me and help me along to learn the ropes, as I would say. He'll be greatly missed by a lot of people in Pensnet. He was well known at St Mark's Church. Lots of the people in Pensnet knew him really well, lived there for many years. He was a lovely family man, very, very kind to everybody. Looked after his wife really well and adored her, and I'll miss him a lot. I haven't been in touch with him for the last few years because he moved out of Pensnet, and we all lost touch with him really because I think he was so busy looking after his wife. Also, I'd like to pay my condolences to Jeff Hanson. He was a lovely man too, very, very funny man. When he was Doreen's consort, I was consort to Mike as the mayor, and we went on quite a few outings together and quite a few meetings together, and he was always the life and soul of the party, and he'll be really missed. And I send my condolences to Doreen. I'm sure he's absolutely devastated by his loss. Margaret, I knew very, very briefly, and I always found her to be a lovely lady and very pleasant, always willing to talk to any of us, whether we were in her party or not. I remember her quite vivacious way of working through the meetings as well. The other gentleman, I'm sorry, I never knew him, but I send my condolences to all their families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Greenaway. Councillor Kettle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to speak about Maggie Wilson, of course. Maggie and I were friends for many years, and I've listened to what has been spoken about her, and I fully concur with everything that's been said. But to me, the very essence of what Maggie was that she was, in the right sense of the word, a very good, old-fashioned local councillor. And she gave of herself, she gave her time, she gave her humility and her humanity to the people she represented. And even though we were on different sides of the council, there was no animosity between us. And we spoke as friends and enjoyed each other's company over many years. So it's a great loss to see the loss of Maggie Wilson. But she did 24 years for the borough, and to live to a great age, although the tragedy of COVID has caught up with her at 89 years of age. We have a lot to thank Maggie for over the years, and she was a delightful lady. Secondly, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to give my condolences to the family of John Davies. I've known John on and off for many years, and he was a quiet, reserved gentleman to me, a very knowledgeable person, and he wouldn't jump in and give you the first thoughts on his mind. He would give you a knowledgeable, frank addition to the conversation, very congenial, very, very knowledgeable, a gentleman. And the passing of someone like John, who's, as has been said from Councillor Harley, to be around the council since 1958 was absolutely remarkable when you think about it. So my condolences to his family and friends. Also, Mr. Mayor, Jeff Amerson was a friend of mine. I enjoyed his company, a lovely character, very supportive of Doreen, and that he has died at such a young age is a tragic loss. I give my condolences and send my condolences to the whole family, and we get the loss of a wonderful man like Jeff. With that, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Councillor Kettle. I'll call upon Zafar Islam, please.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't speak about all of the persons that have been mentioned who we have sadly lost, but I will speak mostly on Margaret Wilson. So many wonderful and moving tributes have been already paid to Margaret Wilson, which is simple testimony to the immense respect and honor she was held in this chamber, irrespective of politics and parties. Mr. Mayor, Margaret was truly a people's councillor, rooted in the community she served with great dedication, commitment, and with tremendous care, and indeed pride. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that she enjoys popular admiration in Brierley Hill and beyond. Margaret loved being a councillor and serving people and helping her constituents, so much so that in spite of her failing health, she continued to complete her elected term to the full till May 2016, giving 24 years of her life to the role and people she loved. She kind of held roving surgeries every time she went shopping. I've heard from many people, Mr. Mayor, that it took her roughly about 1 hour to reach the market hall in High Street because people will stop her and ask for help. And you know yourself, Mr. Mayor, she only lived less than half a mile from the market. For this humble lady, therefore, the proudest highlight of her career was, without doubt, her mayoral year of 2002 to 2003, which gave her many opportunities to move in the diverse communities and youth centres. And as has already been mentioned about the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, she was very much involved with these youth activities. She had built up relationships during her leadership of the Community Development Unit. I think Adams have already mentioned that quite nicely. It is around this time, Mr. Mayor, that I met Margaret many times, although I've known her before as an honorary officer of the Dudley Community Relations Council, which later became Racial Equality Council. I will remain grateful for her kindness and support even after her retirement, but above all, the way she guided me with wisdom and knowledge of the council procedures and culture when I was first elected in 2004. Her family, as has been mentioned, was her heart and soul, particularly since the untimely death of her beloved Ken. In the year Margaret was fighting her first election to be elected to this council. But a strange coincidence, both served as councillors for 24 years. So in conclusion, for Margaret, my deepest condolences and sincere sympathies are with her daughter, Rona, her granddaughters, Kelly, Emma, Sally, Nikki, and her great-grandchildren. As has been said, she will be greatly missed, Mr. Mayor. I like to now say a few words about other councillors. I've known Councillor John Davies for a very, very long time because he used to be part of this end of Dudley for many years. But as Councillor Kettler said, a very reserved man, a very gentle man, a very friendly person who would only speak if he think it was appropriate to do so. But all the same, he was always friendly, whether when he was in the Labour Party or in Tory Party. Good man, we miss him. Clem Buff, although I knew him only shortly, but somehow, like they say, we got on very well. And as Sue has said, P's say a lot about him, passionate for people, passionate for Cosley, and passionate about human life. So that was Clem for me. We understood each other from heart to heart, as to say. As regards Jeff, I met Jeff obviously through Doreen, and it is a loss of a human being. And I pay my condolences to all of the families concerned and their friends. May they rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hislam. I now call upon Councillor Pete Lowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, may I pass my condolences on to all that have lost loved ones. I'm going to start off a very brief contribution, Mr. Mayor, just by making a plea maybe to yourself, Mr. Mayor, and maybe in conjunction with both the Leader of the Council, the Chief Executive, and the Leader of the Opposition, that when it is safe for us to do so, and when we can meet up in person, I think it'd be only fitting that we take a time within the council diary in order to be able to do this face to face, to pay our respects. And I'll make that point because I think each and every one of us will be aware that on a normal council meeting, the tea room would have been full this evening with all of us talking about our experiences and our relationship that with those that have lost. And I think it would be only fitting that rather than do that remotely, we have that fitting time when we can all pass our respects on appropriately. I want to concentrate my contribution really with regard to Margaret Wilson and Clem Boff, two councillors that I knew well and two councillors that served under me whilst I was leader of the council and the Labour group. And both of them shared, Mr. Mayor, many things in common. I would describe them as combative community champions and very trusted comrades. Both Margaret and Clem would be people that as leader you would go to get the mood music of what was going on within your group, because quite often, I'm sure as Patrick and Cadder will allude to, quite often you need to look behind you as well as across at the dispatch box as to what's going on as well. Clem only served between 2013 and 2016, but all that knew Clem know that he had a lifetime of public service before he entered the council chamber. Clem was a passionate trade unionist and was an absolute fierce defender of ordinary people's rights. I found him an absolute ally and somebody who I could go to with a straight question and be promised a straight answer. Margaret Wilson to me can be best described simply as Mrs. Brierley Hill. It was impossible to walk the streets of Brierley Hill with Margaret in a straight line and from A to B. Margaret knew people. And Margaret got that talent that many of us on this call and in the council house actually aspire to. But Margaret undoubtedly had that. She was loved by the people that she served. She was respected and she was known. And she will be an absolute great loss, not just to Brierley Hill, but to the whole council and from our point of view, from the Labour movement as well. So I just would like to pass all of my condolences on to all and all my love and thoughts for all of those that knew them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lowe. I will call upon the Chief Executive to reply to your request, if I may, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hear obviously what Councillor Lowe has indicated, and already we have been thinking of ways with CAP which an appropriate remembrance service could be held. But we'll certainly bear that in mind, and I'll get back to members in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Councillor Millward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is very sad that we're here tonight paying tribute to 4 people who were colleagues and friends in a number of ways to different people. Clem Boff I came across when we used to have the old area committees. And if you may remember, he was a very, very strong advocate for the saving of Coseley baths.
I wonder when that.
Yes, and we had many a cross word on that particular subject. He was a very passionate man. I'm very sorry that we never were able to save that particular facility. And it was great to see him come onto the council because of his community work. And, you know, I pass on my condolences to the family and to all the colleagues that worked with him. John, I met when he was our paper candidate for Netherton. He was never expected to win, and with all honesty, there was no resources hardly put into that particular ward. If it hadn't have been for Councillor Peter Miller and John, and I joined them on a number of occasions, pounding that ward, John, I don't think would have come back to the council. So it was a real shock that night. He was a wonderful, lovely man, very quiet, reserved gentleman who didn't really say anything unless it was worth saying. And my condolences to his family. Margaret Wilson was a wonderful mentor to all councillors, regardless of their political parties. She was a wonderful mentor to me. She was a very formidable and able chairman of the council when she was mayor. And I remember many a time when a sharp, stern voice would break up an argument or, you know, dissipate the argy-bargy that was going on at the time. And as a mayor, she was so wonderful in the fact that you'd find Margaret in the kitchen with her hands in the washing up bowl, cleaning up the cutlery and crockery from any visit that she'd been invited to, and many a time was told, you know, Madam Mayor, you don't wash up, you know, no, we'll do that. Oh, go away, I'll do it. She was a real hands-on councillor and a wonderful chair of the Development Control Committee and a very kind, passionate lady who will be sadly missed. I'll move on finally to Jeff Hanson, who was a member of the Dudley North Conservative Association, supporting Doreen and us as councillors for many, many years. Jeff was an absolute delight. He was a former worker he was a driver for the Bus Corporation. If you've ever seen On the Buses and you listen to Jeff's stories, wow, they could have made all those episodes about Jeff and Doreen, who he met. She was a clippy. And he'll tell you stories of how the clippers used to keep guard while they nipped in the pub for a quick half before the inspector caught them. And these things you can't even imagine would happen today. And if you remember, Mr. Mayor, in your first year in 2019 as mayor, we came across Jeff at the daycare centre in Amblecote, because very sadly he'd succumbed to Alzheimer's disease. He didn't really know us too well, but he recognised the chains. And he told us time and time again of how he was so proud to have done that job with Doreen. And I remember I had a dance with him. There was a singer on. We had some good time, good, you know, nice times talking about what he could remember. And that's how I remember Jeff, who was the fun-loving, liked a pint, put his arms around you and gave you a kiss, whether you wanted one or not. People like Jeff, you know, we won't see them again. And I'd like to pass on my condolences to Doreen and Sarah and all the family. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Millward. I'll call upon Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I had the honour and privilege of knowing and working with Councillor Wilson for over many years now. Margaret was a very special person, a person who always found time for everyone and always greeted them with that special Margaret Wilson smile. She always put the concerns of not only of her own residents in Brariel, but also the residents in Dudley as a whole. She did the borough proud in everything she did, including many of her own councillors and councillors of all parties, which she got on exceptionally well with. Margaret will be sadly missed, to be honest with you, by all of us, not only as a good councillor, but also as a very special friend. I'd also like to mention Jeff Amerson. Jeff was actually consort to Doreen Amerson, who was deputy mayor when I was mayor. We attended many functions together, and he worked in a very professional and caring way. I think he will be sadly missed not only by us, but by his own family. And briefly, reference on Clem. I only knew Clem for a very short, limited time, to be honest with you, when he was a councillor, and many through the community forum. But one thing came out to me quite strong was that he put the people of Coastleigh in front of every decision he made, and he will be sadly missed. But I'd like to pass my fullest condolences on to everyone, basically all our Ferry councils, who's no longer with us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Members of the council, I was very fortunate to know all four people. My early days, of course, were with John Davies when he was the mayor of this borough, and how welcome he made me feel in this chamber where I'm sitting tonight. I kept that relationship going in material party politics for a good many years. Unfortunately, I didn't find out until after his death that he'd actually moved to live in Gornal. If I'd have known that, I'd have been round to see him sooner. I thought he was still in Pensnet. But my time that I spent with former Councillor John Davies will always be remembered for the good times we shared together, and I still have photographs at home that were taken with him when he was the mayor of this borough. Margaret Wilson and myself served on the Development Control Committee, but we always like to call it the Planning Committee because I still believe that's what it is in its proper title. Either in myself being the chairman of, or she being the chairman of, or vice versa, being the shadow chairman, etc., etc. The relationship that we built up there, working together for this borough, was absolutely fantastic. We would ring one another, phone one another, we'd speak to one another, we'd discuss the applications, and we'd work together for the benefit of this borough. A wonderful, wonderful lady. And I remember the times I spent with her, and the time she spoke so passionately of living in that flat, in that tower block in Brierley Hill with all those wonderful views. Myself and Councillor Wilson had that special relationship. Coming back to Jeff Amerson, I've known Jeff Amerson quite a number of years, worked with him, got on well with him, and as Councillor Millward spoke earlier, the last time I saw him was down in Amblecote. He was far from being well at the time. What we have to remember as an Amerson family, the problems I've had with health, and the problems I've had with losses over these last few years. Clem Buff, of course, did forgive me like JT Wilson did about Coasley Baths. We used to have our differences of opinion, and most times we met, but I've made peace with JT Wilson before he passed on, and he did say to me, "I've forgiven you for taking Coasley Baths down. It was long overdue," and I felt so pleased about that. But coming back, one of the things that I've enjoyed with my time here in Dudley is the pleasure and the honour, and I use the word honour, of knowing such good people that we're talking about this evening. Each and every one of them I had a good relationship with, and I do my best to keep a good relationship with a lot of people. But these people are very special to all of us. They're a sad loss to us and to the community. May they rest in peace and rise in glory. My condolences and sympathy go to their family, their sad loss at this time. Thank you. Can I take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Catherine Driscoll, who has now taken up her duties as the Director of Children's Services. May I say to you, Dr. Driscoll, you're on the screen now. I hope your time you spend with us here in Dudley will be an happy time. I hope that we can work together. I haven't met you apart from I can see you on the screen now, but when I have the opportunity, please pop along and we can have a little chat, because that would be absolutely lovely. So it's a very, very warm Dudley welcome to you, and I hope that you enjoy yourself and your service here with this borough. I'm sure most people will make you welcome. We're a good lot of folk up here, so you're onto a good thing. And so I'm sure members will join with me in wishing Catherine every success in her new role. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Report and recommendations. Capital Programme Monitoring. I call upon the leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I echo your welcome to Catherine. Big job to do, and I'm sure she'll be a great addition to our senior team here on Dudley Council. Mr. Mayor, members of the Council, I move that the recommendations of the Cabinet be approved and adopted.
Can I call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion?
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Any comments or any discussion on the issue? Councillor Crompton.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and thank you. My question, well, it's really a comment. It's on page 8 of the report, and it's related to Fordraft Street. Mr. Mayor, you and Councillor Harley may remember, or you may not actually remember, on the 30th of November when we held our full council meeting, I asked Councillor Harley to intervene in the problem, well, as far as we saw it, a major problem with the planning application that had been put forward by the council. I think I might well, to paraphrase it, I might well have said, can we get the officers to go back to the drawing board? Councillor Harley wouldn't have known about a planning application that was going on in our neck of the woods, and I wouldn't have expected him to. But what I'd like to say, I'd like to actually pay credit where credit is due. Councillor Harley has gone back to our housing officers, and I'd like to pay credit to him for doing so. I'd also like to pay credit to the officers involved. We've held a meeting now with them, and they really have gone back to the drawing board. We've now got a development that we as the 3 ward councillors fully support. There will be problems with it. It's in an area where we've got shops to the front of the development, where parking will be a problem. We've got a communal area proposed within the planning application, or at least the proposals. It may not have got through to planning as yet. I wasn't quite sure when that would go through. But we've got an area of communal use being put forward, which would be a green space. And sadly, in the past, there's been antisocial behaviour in that area. So what we would like to do is to think about other ways we could use that area. The main thing, though, is that we are getting consultation out there with our community about this. Whilst we as the 3 councillors fully support what has been put forward, we'll obviously listen to our constituents. It's going to be difficult. We can't go around knocking their doors. We'd usually hold a public meeting in our ward for issues like this. We can't do that. So we'll work closely with the housing officers to see what information we can get out there and how they can come back to us on this. But we truly hope that this development, which is going to be 10 council houses and a council bungalow, which is so desperately needed in our area and other areas, is now able to go ahead. So I just wanted to put that on the record, Mr. Mayor, and I think it should be put on the record.
Thank you, Councillor Crompton. Councillor Harley, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Crompton, thank you very much for your kind words, much appreciated. We can't always assist in the manner that we have, but I'm very pleased after talking to some of your local residents along with one of your ward colleagues that at least it looks like there might be a way forward that the majority of people in that area can agree on, and if you can, fantastic.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. I'll call upon Councillor Khurshid Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions and comments will be around the low carbon place strategy on page 11. This is where the council had been awarded grant of 2.5 million from ERDF to deliver a project that will reduce carbon emissions, and there'd be a further 2.5 million of match funding from HRA budget. Understandably, due to COVID risks, we are struggling to find and complete projects and then draw down the funding. Just a bit concerned that our heating installer has gone into administration and the replacement is unlikely to be until after the 1st of April. This obviously doesn't help. I recall that grant monies had a end date to spend the money on, and also recall that there was going to be an extension of time made in so that it can be carried forward. My questions are: one, was there a date within which the money had to be spent and drawn down? If so, was an extension granted? If so, what is the new date, extended date to complete works and the drawdown of fundings? Is there any likelihood of the council not being able to draw down full grant monies, and is there a risk of part being lost, in particular as we don't have the replacement contractor in place? And if there is any risk, then could the replacement of substation and transformer referred to in paragraph 10 on page 3 not be funded from the ERDF grant instead of borrowing the additional £500,000? If this is possible, then we should avoid taking further debt and utilise the grant monies. And whilst we're on the topic of the substation, are you able to, a leader or the appropriate cabinet member, confirm what prompted an on-site investigation to have a new substation? There is no detail behind this, and I'll be grateful if there's some details provided around that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ahmed. I think what I'm going to do is one or two other inquiries now come along. So I'll call upon Councillor Zada, and then the leader of the council will respond at the end of the question. So Councillor Zada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is related to page 10 of the capital monitoring programme and relates to nitrogen oxide as a result of traffic. What I would like to know is it shares on that report that there is some improvement. I'd like to know whether the improvement is as a direct result of lockdown, or is there an improvement because of an intervention that the council has taken? And what would be the true reading if we took out the period during a lockdown? Because actually, I would hope that people don't travel as much during lockdown, and therefore naturally nitrogen oxide levels across the whole of the borough will have been reduced, and therefore I can't accept at face value without the detail whether there is or there isn't any improvement. And if there is an improvement, if we take out the lockdown period, then of course I would welcome that for the residents of the borough. And I'd also like to echo your comments, Mr. Mayor, about welcoming new colleagues to the council. We look forward to their contribution, and we will obviously be impressed with the outcome that they deliver for all of the various portfolios that they oversee in due course. Many thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zada. Councillor Shaukat Ali.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is relating to Dudley Town Centre Highways Infrastructure, item 11 on page 3. Whilst I welcome the works, I'm not sure what the plans are for Cavendish House site. We started off with a commercial, retail and leisure mixed-use development with a large supermarket. The supermarket then went off the plans. My ward colleagues and I supported plans for student accommodation on the site to make the business plan work and get regeneration started. Then the cinema was taken off the plans. Then there is talk of a stadium and an ice rink, and what next, Mr. Mayor? The council has missed opportunity to bring leisure, health and social care under one roof in Flood Street. However, the work we have done on this side has opened doors for health provision in the centre of the town. We don't want another loss of opportunity. The developers are playing a clever game, first refusing to accept LEP funding for demolition of Cavendish House because the conditions required them to deliver and not to sit on an empty site. Local people want to know what are the plans for this site and timescales for when it is going to happen. Some of the infrastructure works that my colleagues and I supported, for example, access from the bypass, was on the understanding of a bigger development. And if all we are going to get is housing, there is no need to have access from the bypass. Trindle Road is more than adequate for this purpose, and we need to bring people into the town and not to get them onto the bypass to drive somewhere else. What is lacking, Mr. Mayor, is ambition and a coherent plan to transform the whole site, linking it with a wider regeneration rather than taking a piecemeal approach. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Shaukat Ali. Councillor Ian Kettle. Okay, it seems as though we've lost Councillor Kettle. I will move on then. I'll call upon Councillor Neef. Oh, sorry, he's on. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Kettle, carry on.
I do apologise, Mr. Mayor. I was at fault. The article concerning the cone is much more involved than the report makes out concerning moving the glass blowing and into another building and continuing the work of craft-made glass on the site. Latter part of last spring, we had some very severe storms and were forced to close the cone because of the amount of water that was going in. And because of its age and its shape and the kind of construction, we decided to get a specialist surveyor in, which has took probably up until, because of COVID and other commitments, has took up until about now. And these specialists from Stoke are coming in to give us a survey, and should have it probably April, May. But it's ideal that we move the glass blowers into a safer area and we allow the public to see a handmade glass made in that facility. It's a wonderful art-based craft and skill, and it's delighted to see it continuing in Wordsley. But I'd just like to say that this is the reason behind it, and there's far more involved than just moving a few glass blowers. So I just wanted to give the overall picture as for what's going on there. As for the other questions concerning nitric oxide and questions by Kushida Ahmed, I'll get to the officers concerned and get a written answer for them and give them a written reply. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Kettle. Sorry about this. I'll call upon Councillor Hanif, please. Councillor Hanif.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor. My question is relating to CCTV control room on page 14. In line, Mr. Mayor, we still envisage ongoing fly tipping on a daily basis and some antisocial behaviour issues. Apart from looking at the updates given on page 14 in paragraph 4, can I ask the Cabinet Member for Housing and Community Safety to give me and the Lie councillors any further updates, especially on any completion dates agreed, for the whole of the system to be in operation? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hanif. Councillor Ridney.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't get my camera on. Apologies. I'm referring to page 4, paragraph 13, concerning Penns Meadow Special School, acquisition of land and buildings. I would just like to know, is it likely that myself as the Shadow Cabinet Member will be getting a briefing on this? as it says these decisions were taken in private. It does say it is available to members, but I just wondered when I would be getting a briefing on this, and also have the ward councillors been briefed, and when are they likely to be getting a brief on it, please?
Thank you, Councillor Ridney. Councillor Shakespeare.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a comment on the questions that Councillor Khurshid Ahmed asked about the substation. Obviously, the life capacity of the substation and the transformer is generally about 40 years. And the one at Lister Road for the depot is almost 80 years old. So I think that probably answers your question. And it's failing with underground connectors in a poor condition at the moment, and capable of supporting the future electrical vehicle charging points, which will be at the depot. So the work will be completed this year, and obviously we've explained the funding. Councillor Kettle obviously is going to answer your other question, and then I slightly missed. I had a bit of a warble on the old Wi-Fi here, but Councillor Zada mentioned about the nitrogen dioxide levels in Netherton. Obviously, at the time, pre-COVID, there was increased enforcement activity. It did take place in the area as requested by the ward councillors. And obviously, since then, there's been further improvements to the bus fleet that may have contributed to a reduced level of nitrogen dioxide. However, I know revised parking, which was suggested, and traffic movement proposals were not supported by the ward members. Notwithstanding this, it is difficult to obtain a clear picture as COVID-19 restrictions have skewed monitoring results at the moment, but we will continue to monitor to determine any future steps in Netherton. And just as a final point, there was a report went to place scrutiny on the 19th of November based on air quality in the borough, and this was presented by Tim Glues in Public Health, because it actually comes under that. And Netherton was detailed as one of the sites of concern. However, recorded levels of nitrogen dioxide in the area are showing a significant improvement at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shakespeare. I'll call upon the leader to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start at the top. Councillor Ahmed's question. Yeah, we get a written response to that. That's quite a few questions there, a few technical responses. So if it can be certainly minuted, then I want Councillor Ahmed to have a full written response. And again, the same to Councillor Zada, although Councillor Shakespeare has already partly answered that question. For my opinion, for what it's worth, the amount of emissions probably has dropped, but that probably does point to the amount of traffic that disappeared from our roads during the first lockdown. Reference Councillor Ali Portersfield. Councillor Ali really is, Mr. Mayor, the gift that keeps giving. Originally, the Portersfield project would have had a large supermarket developed there, but then of course the market for supermarkets had dropped out. And I know for a fact that there were two of the major supermarkets competing to develop a large supermarket on that site. Both lost interest a long time ago, and certainly before this current administration. Reference to student accommodation, that is still in place and confirmed, as is further residential. And Mr. Mayor, I can state that we are very keen to see some form of leisure on that site. We all harp on about wanting high streets to go back to the former glory. That will not happen on its own through retail, simply because people's shopping habits have changed. If we want to get people on our high streets, we have to have, I believe, a leisure attraction that will bring them into the town centre, bring them into the borough, and our plans do just that. Councillor Ali scoffs at the £6 million that we have won from the Combined Authority to open up this development. The £6 million road infrastructure opens the development up, and it opens up the town centre for people to get into the town from the bypass, not just to carry on driving off to either Stourbridge or Brierley Hill, but actually to come into the town centre. You know, we believe this town's best days are ahead of it, not behind it. The road infrastructure opens up the project. We have also, Mr Mayor, as the report will confirm, and no one has mentioned this, which I'm surprised about, it seems the Labour Party don't want to pick up on good news, but in that report, Mr Mayor, it does highlight the fact that yet again, this administration has gone out, fought for Dudley and got the necessary funding. And it is in there, Mr Mayor, in this report that we have the funding for the new interchange bus station, to the likes of you and me, Mr Mayor, who prefer old-fashioned phrases. But the money is there. So the road unlocks the investment, the interchange money is there, the metro is firmly on its way, and we are very close to freezing what we want on this site. As and when that happens, Mr Mayor, I can assure Councillor Ali and the rest of the 6 ward councillors for the town centre that we will give them a full briefing as and when we are prepared to do so, once we know that the scheme is frozen and all legalities have been, I's have been crossed, T's have been crossed, and we can move forward. And we would hope that they will support us in our endeavours to regenerate Dudley Town Centre. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Does Council agree? That is carried.
Aye.
That is carried.
Aye. Aye.
Annual review of the Constitution. I call upon the leader.
Okay, Mr Mayor, thank you. Mr Mayor, members of the council, I move that the recommendations of the Cabinet be approved and adopted. Thank you.
I call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak? Nope. No speakers. Okay. Right, I can't ask for all agree then, can I? If it's already been done. Right. Deployment. All agree? Council agree?
Aye.
That's carried.
Aye.
Aye.
Deployment of resources housing revenue account and private sector housing capital. I call upon Councillor Laura Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor and members of the council, I move that the recommendations of the Cabinet be approved and adopted.
Call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr Mayor.
Speakers. Councillor Barnett.
Yep. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Try and get the video on. There we go. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and Councillor Taylor, if you don't mind, with regards to paragraph 35 on page 66, I noticed that the Director of Housing now has the authority to purchase land in order to create viable sites, and these sites are obviously for much needed housing development. Can you confirm that this authority can be used to find genuine brownfield sites for development of new housing, and do that before considering developing homes on what is precious green space in wards like Quarry Bank and Dudley Wood? I'm not talking about green belt, it's a different thing. I'm talking about green space. So can you confirm that that authority can be used to purchase brownfield sites before developing on green space? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. No other speakers. I'll call upon Councillor Laura Taylor to reply, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Yeah, I can confirm that the brownfield site first policy applies to the whole council, so that will be any land that is purchased on behalf of the council through the Director of Housing.
Thank you.
Does Council agree?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
That is carried. Pay policy statement. I call upon Councillor Simon Phipps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I move that the report and recommendations of the Cabinet be approved and adopted.
I call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions on the report? There are no speakers. All agreed?
Aye.
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 That is carried. Treasury Management, I call upon Councillor Alan Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I move that the recommendations of the Audit and Standards Committee be approved and adopted. And in doing so, I would just like to point out that we had a higher normal investment during this period, which was 63 million. This was due to us having taken out a loan for cash flow purposes and then receiving the grants from the government, including the business rates. Therefore, at the time, the council was very cash rich. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone wish to speak on the? There are no speakers. Does Council agree?
Aye.
Aye.
That is carried. Independent Remuneration Panel Members Allowance Scheme. I call upon the Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I move that the recommendations in the report of the Lead for Law and Governance be approved and adopted. Thank you.
Call upon the Deputy Leader to second the motion.
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any speakers? No speakers are indicated to speak on this for the debate. Does Council agree?
Aye.
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 That is carried.
Aye.
Notice of motion. Following the consultation with the group leaders, it has been agreed that the notices of motion previously submitted are deferred for further consideration. Move on to questions from members under Council Procedure Rule 11. The purpose of this session is for members to ask questions. There will be a 1 hour limit on the question time session. The time limit on all individual contributions during this session will be 2 minutes. All questions will be dealt with individually, one at a time. If time permits, members may indicate to ask other questions during the session. When I call on members to ask a supplementary question, this must relate to the original question or the answer given. Before I move on, I have to make a statement to say no written questions have been submitted in advance. Is that correct, Mr. Mr. Chief Executive? No written questions?
There are none.
Thank you very much. Okay. Can members now indicate if they have any questions for the Leader, Cabinet members, or for chairs of the select committees, or etc. etc. Councillor Jackie Cowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I addressed this question to the Cabinet Member for Health and Adult Social Care. This relates to Saltwell's EDC, where lateral flow tests are being carried out and food parcels prepared. It has been raised with me that staff cleaning public areas and toilets are provided with one mask, which must be worn until it falls to pieces, unless they supply their own. It is suggested that some staff are repairing masks. Management have been challenged and have apparently stated that they can't afford to provide masks every day. If true, this is completely unacceptable. Can this be urgently investigated at Saltwells and any other facilities operating within the pandemic response and remedied immediately, please? Thank you.
Councillor Barlow, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the first that I've heard of it. I will certainly get this investigated with the Director of Public Health and Wellbeing and ensure that a written report is provided to Councillor Cowell as a matter of urgency. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Cowell, have you got a supplementary question?
Not as such, but obviously I would urge that that is done as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell. Councillor Chris Barnett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a question for Councillor Taylor again. I am a bit confused because you see, I asked a question at Cabinet about the council allowing developments on green space, and Councillor Harley confirmed a commitment to preventing developments on green belt. But we all know that green belt and green space are different things. Green space in urban areas doesn't have the legal protection that the green belt land has. And I actually saw a Facebook advert this week that featured Mayor Andy Street. I'm not entirely sure it wasn't you in it as well, Councillor Taylor, promising to protect green space from development. So I've asked you already about a commitment to preventing development on the precious green space in urban areas, and particularly areas like the Saltwells housing estate. So residents there have limited access to safe places for their children to play outdoors. Now I ask this because recently I've had 2 emails from the housing department regarding the Saltwells housing estate. One telling me that Dudley want to allow 24 houses to be built on the children's playing field off Copse Road, and another saying that Dudley wished to allow development of a number of bungalows off Maybank Road. Now, both of these sites have been public green spaces since at least the 1950s. And across the borough and in Quarry Bank and Dudley Wood, there are genuine brownfield sites that have been bought up by developers and left to rot and become eyesores. So meanwhile, Dudley is planning to build houses on children's playing fields. So Councillor Taylor, can you please confirm your commitment to prevent development on green spaces? And please can you instruct the housing department to look for genuine brownfield sites for the much needed development of new housing? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Councillor Laura Taylor to reply, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Yeah, I think it's quite clear that the Conservatives in this area have a clear and consistent approach to the greenfield and greenbelt argument, that we do have a brownfield site first policy. If there are any specific sites that you want to discuss, we can happily go and discuss them, bring them to me, and we can have a meeting about those.
Councillor Barnett, have you got a supplementary question to the reply?
Yes, I do, because that doesn't answer my question. I've asked for a commitment. Those sites are green spaces, and Dudley Council have indicated to me that they wish to build on them, and that's not good enough. I want a commitment that they won't build on them.
Councillor Laura Taylor to respond.
As I've said, there has been a consistent commitment from this Conservative administration that we run a brownfield site first policy, and I'll happily discuss any individual sites with you.
Thank you. Councillor Shaukat Ali. Councillor Ali.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Councillor Nicholas Barlow. Can he share with us the uptake of vaccination amongst vulnerable members of the community? And does he agree with me that the people his leader calls Tom, Dick and Harry are our community heroes who have gone above and beyond the call of duty helping, supporting people since the first lockdown last year, delivering food parcels, medicines, helping in the hospital, helping with lateral flow tests, vaccinations, and much more. And without the volunteers, the challenge of containing and tackling coronavirus would have been a much harder task. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Councillor Barlow to respond.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Ali, I will again ask the Director of Public Health and Wellbeing to provide an update through our NHS partners. Yes, you are right. The voluntary sector and individuals have all played a part, and a very important part, the local authority and the NHS in getting the vaccines rolled out, and also providing the additional support. We will, no doubt, recognise the valuable importance of that work at some point in the near future. But with regards to the vaccination update uptake, I'll get that to you, Councillor Ali. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Ali, can I come back to you? Is there any supplementary or further information you require?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Does Councillor Barlow, does he agree with me that more needs to be done to support volunteers, and calling them names is unlikely to encourage them to put themselves forward?
Councillor Barlow, would you like to respond?
I wasn't aware of the comments that the leader had made. Offensively by any means. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barlow, we actually lost connection on your reply. Would you mind repeating yourself for us, please?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm not aware of the made, so obviously I can't comment on that. I'm sure that it wasn't done in an offensive way, and I'm sure that the leader himself, but everybody has certainly played a part, and we all, on both sides of this council, acknowledge the work that every single person has done to get us through this pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, then thank you, Councillor Barlow. I'm sorry, Councillor Ali, for the poor connection there, but I'm sure that what you've missed, Councillor Barlow will get back to fill you in on the little bits that we missed out on. I must move on now to Councillor Baton. Councillor Baton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of these days, Mr. Mayor, you're going to get my name right. So, my question, Mr. Mayor, is to Councillor Dave Tyler, Chair of the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Tyler, on the minutes in the White Book, page 70, when we debated and discussed the Health and Wellbeing Board's strategy, where I expressed real dissatisfaction with the current strategy not being fit for purpose. And whilst it's recognised in the comments and the reporting section, what assurances do we have going forward that this strategy will be reviewed, that there will be oversight from a scrutiny process of this report? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Health and Wellbeing Board was set up as a result of the Health and Social Care Act in 2012. That's many, many years ago in political terms. And in a previous paper on this same committee, we talked about a joint initiative, which was agreed by all members on the committee, to push yet again for this government to provide a green paper, their green paper, which has been promised for years, on health and adult social care. So I'd ask that we push for that again. I know Councillor Barlow and Councillor Bayton have done this in the past at least twice. So I'd ask for that to be pushed forward because that really is the nub of the matter. We've got a Health and Wellbeing Board, which is a statutory, has a statutory duty with all of our health and welfare partners to review the health and well-being of everyone in the borough. I have to say, having looked at the minutes of lots of health and wellbeing boards, it's a very good committee for writing reports, receiving them and noting them. However, there is a massive capacity here for the Health and Wellbeing Board to drive forward, especially post-COVID, some real innovative and far-reaching initiatives towards health and well-being. We don't really take too much interest in health and well-being boards as a council. What we should be doing, and what I'm going to do is, because all scrutiny committees are in the process now of drawing up their programmes for next year. If I can, through you, Mr. Mayor, please suggest all colleagues to look at what they're putting forward for scrutiny for next year. Let's be inventive and let's do scrutiny properly. We've shown in this current year that we scrutinised COVID and we think we did it well as a council. Let's scrutinise the Health and Wellbeing Board and see if it's up for purpose now and see if it's pushing its remit forward. We also need the backing of the government with their green paper. So yes, we'll be pushing a scrutiny review of the Health and Wellbeing Board for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. Councillor Bayton, have you got any supplementary question?
No, Mr. Mayor, I haven't. Just to thank Councillor Tyler for that assurance that it will go into the scrutiny process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this question really is for the Leader of the Council because it crosses over environment, regeneration and finance and is about small neighbourhood green open spaces, and to ask if Council has a policy in place at the moment that will protect these places for future generations to enjoy. Just for the record, and so we can be absolutely clear about what we're talking about here, these spaces are not parks, they're not parcels of land protected by planning law or trusts or covenants, and they're not the type of land that actually Councillor Barnett was talking about earlier. They are plots of land, often gifted by local builders over the last 70 years or so, which provide breathing spaces and a sense of place in residential areas up and down the borough. It's worth noting that there are literally thousands of these places and small sites in Dudley, and there is no known assessment as to what could be at risk of loss to potential housing development. In Crowley and Wollascote, these kind of areas would be found in places like Pedmore Hill, Lye Green and Nether End, and that literally is just to name a few. What drives concern so is recognition that there is an absolute need to build more homes, but within this there are tensions about appropriate development, overdevelopment and the loss of amenities, all of which make a massive difference to the quality of life locally. These drivers of change create a clear and present danger to the future existence of these small green spaces, spaces which could easily end up being considered as brownfield sites, which they absolutely are not. And if action is not taken immediately to prevent this, we are running some massive risks of losing what are really valuable places for people locally. Mr. Mayor, the concerns that I'm expressing this evening should not be dismissed as being without foundation. After all, we have been here before, and I specifically make reference to school playing fields back in the 70s and the 80s, and it would be a disaster for this borough to be denuded of these lovely spaces because we couldn't be bothered to ensure protections were in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Partridge. You did overrun, but I'll let you get away with that bit. Councillor Hawley to reply, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it brief. Councillor Partridge is, she raises a very valid point. And of course, there was a cabinet report that went through full council, I think a couple of meetings back, or even the last one, where we're doing just this, but we're offering additional protection to some of these open spaces that aren't parks, they are areas of natural beauty, and it's a clear sign that we're doing far more for these spaces than the cabinet did when Councillor Partridge was a member of it, because I do recall that bungalows were built on land in New Farm Road in Lye, which was really against the wishes of the local residents at the time. But if she has any other spaces that she'd like to try and protect, what she has to do is raise these with her fellow ward councillors, contact the relevant officers, and of course, if I can, I'm more than happy to help her once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Councillor Partridge, have you got a supplementary to that?
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say that somehow I've just not managed to make the point clearly enough. I am not talking, right, about the type of sites that the housing revenue account was developing. I'm talking about much smaller parcels of land than that. Very often they'll be found on places like the Broadway. I really didn't want to name sites because I don't want to set concerns running in the local communities. What I do need to say is that policy, strategy and process documents in this local authority are either past their expiry dates or coming towards the end of them. But in any event, it's really clear to me now that we do need to have a look at what spaces we value on our estates as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Partridge. Councillor Harley, do you want to respond?
Nothing further to add, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you both. Councillor Zarda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for Councillor Barlow, and I wasn't planning on asking this question, and the only reason I'm asking this question is I was extremely disappointed at the answer that Councillor Barlow gave in response to Jackie Cowell's concerns, which are alarming and probably illegal. If this council is not protecting its workers, not only is it putting the workers at risk, but it has the potential of putting other people in the borough at risk, particularly as Councillor Cowell indicated the sorts of work that these workers, council workers, were doing, which was parcel delivery for essential food. I can't believe that I heard the cabinet member say that he will send a written response. I would hope that tomorrow morning he would send an additional box of masks and indicate that there is no restriction on wearing masks and they could be changed as frequently as is necessary to keep these workers safe. So this isn't a question. This is to indicate that this council should not be putting any council worker at risk. And if there is any restriction on masks, I, for one, will not rest until I have made it categorically clear that we cannot afford our workers on the front line to be exposing themselves to unnecessary risks. Too many people have died, and we have mourned some of them at the start of this meeting, and I do not want to attend any further meeting where I have to talk about another loss of coronavirus. So save the written responses, send us a couple of boxes of masks down there, and tomorrow morning send a global message out to every single worker that either works for the council directly or indirectly, that we will not put council workers at risk, and they will be entitled to use as frequently as much PPE equipment as they feel will put them and other people at risk. I'm not expecting a response to this question. I expect answers, and I would save the time in sending a response to Councillor Harley. Send a box of masks, or I shall do it first thing tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Councillor Zarda. Councillor Barlow, would you like to respond, please? Yeah, Councillor Barlow, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, Councillor Barlow, you're off mute, but we still can't hear what you're saying.
Seems to go off mute when we need answers.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Just a point of order from
Councillor Simon Phipps, Mr. Mayor.
Oh yes.
I could point out that I know that Councillor Barlow's had connection issues earlier. He might want to try either removing the camera and seeing if the audio just works, but also I think that you are able, if you so wish, to choose another cabinet member to respond on his behalf, maybe the leader of the council.
Councillor Harley, would you like to take this up?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. Mr.
Thank
Mayor, it wasn't so long back that everybody was applauding the work of the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee, where they looked very at an in-depth measure on how this council had coped and had performed, and not just the council, but also the partnership with its partners. And one section of this report, which was applauded by all, was on PPE. Now, we didn't have a problem with PPE within this pandemic. Now, if there are issues with PPE in certain sectors, then they need to be raised immediately with the relevant officers and directorate, and if needed, the cabinet member. But cabinet members should not be getting involved in operational day-to-day issues. It shouldn't come to that. Those complaints should go direct to the relevant officer team. Then if they're not resolved, then obviously bring that cabinet member in. I find it absolutely galling that we have lectures from members of the Labour group here tonight who have waited for a full council meeting to raise these complaints. Shame on you. It takes more than 6 or 7 weeks between each council meeting for COVID to spread amongst our population. If we have concerns, do the decent thing and raise them with the relevant officer team. And if you need to, cabinet member, and if you need to take it further, raise it with me. But for goodness sake, do the respectful thing. Don't wait 6 or 7 weeks for a full council meeting to get your 5 minutes of fame. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Zarda, have you any supplementary to the question you've asked?
Yes, I have actually. The actual my interjection is not related to raising this issue. My interjection is a direct result of the lack of action that was dedicated by this cabinet member. And actually, what I would say is, if this is the response from senior cabinet members in response to raising issues, then there is a serious issue around culture that we need to look at. The issue isn't about whether there is or there isn't PPE, because as Councillor Harley said, that issue has been dealt with at previous meetings. The issue is whether there are messages going out by this authority around the lack or the use of PPE, and that is restricted. I'm not looking for fame here. I'm looking for safety for our council officers, and that will be enough for me to claim my credit. I will ask again: send them masks. Don't send us letters that says you've had a look at it. And actually, I do agree with Councillor Harley, and I would like to second his comments that if anybody has got any queries around the lack of PPE, that they should raise it immediately. But what I would also say, and I expected the leader of the council to say it, and I hope in his response he will say it, that if any member of this authority working for or on behalf of this authority needs to use PPE, they can use it in the volume that is appropriate to keep them safe. That's what I'm looking for, and that's what I will carry on talking about until I'm absolutely assured that everybody's got the adequate levels that are needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zardi. Comments from the leader?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I can categorically say that the masks will be there tomorrow to give short-term and longer-term assurance, and we will look in to see what's happened. But I reiterate my earlier point that we can resolve issues, operational issues like this, at the flick of a switch, one phone call, or one quick meeting. We don't need to wait several weeks to raise issues like this. And I think Councillor Zali is agreeing with me. And this goes out to all 72 members of the council. You know, when we have issues like this that are extremely serious, raise it with the relevant team. Don't wait for full council to do that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Raleigh. Councillor Mohammed Hanif.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that we moved on in the agenda, okay, but in the earlier part of capital monitoring, I did actually ask a question, which I did not get a reply from the cabinet member for housing or the leader relating to CCTV. I'm not here to gain fame here, Mr. Mayor, tonight, but I have been asked by several of my constituents to sort of get an update on what is happening with the cameras and are there any agreed updates or agreed dates for completion. So can I request that?
Yes, you certainly can. And I support you wholeheartedly because I'm suffering with the same sort of problems over a long period of time, like yourself, in my ward in Gornal. And I've been waiting equally as long, so I do support it and the comments that you've made. Councillor Lauder Taylor to reply, please.
Hi, Councillor Hanif. Yeah, obviously the questions in the capital programme go direct to the leader, so apologies that I couldn't reply to you at that point. Happy to get you more details on that. As far as I'm aware, at the last check, the cameras will be live within the next probably 3 weeks or so. So I'll find out the specifics and get those over to you.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Councillor Hanif, any supplementary question?
No, I think you know, if I can get that reply that's been promised, written reply, then that's be sufficient, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hanif. Councillor Peatlow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's only a short clarification, really, on the leader's response to Councillor Partridge earlier, because he referred to a development in my ward of Lyons Stourbridge North and referred to resident opposition to the development, and I'm just wondering whether any information has been withheld from the local authorities or whether my understanding is actually more accurate in that actually all of the residents' concerns were addressed as part of that development, and indeed the residents actually took part and designed the green spaces as part of that development. And up until the leader actually spoke, I thought that was a good news story rather than a potential bad news story. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hardy to reply, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Pete didn't need me so touchy. I'm just using it as an example where we have these open spaces where they can be developed, and some people will like them, but there will be some people who don't. And clearly, according to my sources, one of the former members of Parliament clearly had complaints go to her office, so some people clearly didn't like it. But it is a fine line that we walk when we have administrations and we plan to build on these sites. Some people will like it, some won't. And if there are very active campaigns for or against, then they may well sway the mood at the time. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Harley. Call upon Councillor Jackie Cowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need to point out that the reason I raised the issue that I did in the way that I did is because it's come up only over the weekend and I needed an urgent response. The problem is if I'd put it through any other mechanism, it's taking too long at the moment, and it is because of the urgency that I raised it in the unusual way that I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell. So you're happy now with the responses? Yep. No.
So long as they're acted on.
Well, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cowell. Call upon Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I think you're probably an appropriate time just to thank everybody in the borough who are playing their part in the rollout of the vaccination programme. It's quite clear that that is sort of the way forward, and that's sort of going to plan is pivotal in things getting back to normal. So I'd like to say thank you to Councillor Barlow, the leader of the council, everybody in the NHS, and all the volunteers across the borough who are doing their part. Just a question really to the leader in regards to the comment that was made earlier on. Was it appropriate for councillors and members of the public to give lifts to other members of the public for the vaccinations at the start or earlier in the year? I know a member made a comment earlier on. I just wanted clarification on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, at the time it wasn't appropriate whatsoever. When Councillor Ali first made this this call, and I don't shout him down for making that call, it's the manner in which he's done it, and at the time, there was an appropriate time for everything. But at this time, Mr. Mayor, cast your mind back, we were having 50,000 plus new cases of COVID confirmed each and every day, 50,000 plus. We're also having 1,200 deaths a day at the time this call went out. And at the time, Mr. Mayor, quite frankly, the advice from the senior officer team was what Councillor Ali was calling for was quite illegal. Now, I don't care whether other authorities have done this. I'm not going to endorse something that at the time was illegal and extremely foolhardy. Now, at the time, Mr. Mayor, those members of the public that couldn't get access to a GP surgery for their vaccination, there were already certain GP surgeries where practice nurses were going out visiting residents that were too frail or who didn't have access to transport. So, Mr. Mayor, what Councillor Ali was asking for was already being provided. So it wasn't appropriate at all at that time. 50,000 new cases, 1,200 deaths, totally inappropriate at that time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harley. Councillor Roberts, any supplementary question to the response from the leader?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I call upon Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, Mr. Mayor, is reference to Licensing Subcommittee 2. In the minutes of the meeting, it says that I sent my apologies to that meeting. That's not quite true, because what happened there is that because I was objecting to this proposal, I stood down as chair. I logged on to the committee meeting, but for some reason or other was not allowed to speak. I've asked quite a number of officers relating to this. The last question went to the leader of legal. I'm still waiting for a reason why I wasn't allowed to speak. Could somebody check this, please, and let me know what's been going on?
Councillor Evans, well, would you like to respond to your question, please?
Well, I think really it's a matter for the Chief Executive or the Leader of the Council.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Exec, I'm sure is sitting next to you in the council chamber. Yes. Social distancing, I'm sure. Yes. I'm sure that Mr. O'Keefe can look into this and get an answer back to Councillor Evans as to why he wasn't admitted into the meeting. I can only say, tongue-in-cheek, Mr. Mayor, maybe we had a Jack Weaver amongst us. But aside from that, I'm sure the Chief Exec will get to the bottom of this. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Evans.
I'm happy with that, Mr. Mayor.
Response from Chief Executive.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Councillor Evans could drop me a line by email tomorrow with the details, I'll look into that for you urgently.
Councillor Evans, are you happy with that?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. I'm sorry about that, but I was getting a lot of feedback all at once. That's all right. Very confusing. Sure. That's quite good. As there are no further questions, so that completes the question time agenda item. Urgent business. As there are no urgent business, so that concludes this meeting of the council. May I thank each and every one of you for your attendance this evening, for being so kind and understanding with myself and the Chief Executive and the Deputy of dealing with the council meeting this evening. And I wish you all a very, very good evening, and I hope things will go well for you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.